Welcome to Toolkit Tuesdays. Uh, I'm one of your hosts this morning, Jenny Horner, and with me are my colleagues, Amy Matusik. I'm not sure if Colleen Tucker is on yet or Vanetta Wilson. But this morning's topic is writing plans that drive change. And we think it's a really, really important topic to hone in on and just take a deep dive. So I'm excited that we're all together this morning. Um, it's our hope that anyone who works in service coordination joins us this morning as we take a refresher on this topic. I'll be sharing the fundamental reminders and tips of writing goals. And then our partners at the Center of Excellence, Nancy Lowry Brigger and Pat Miles, will be joining us. And they'll be talking more about the art of writing goals and into your plans. This session will be recorded and shared on our website for future reference. Please either raise your hand or type in the chat box if you have a question or comment. Also, please remember to remain muted at all times to avoid feedback or background noise. The presentation and handouts will be placed in the chat. And a survey will also be available at the end of today, which will help us improve future meetings. And we will post this presentation today on our website as well under Service Coordination and Toolkit Tuesday topics. So let's get started talking about SMART goals and creating them. And some of you are fairly new. Maybe you haven't heard of SMART goals ever. Some of you but it's great to refresh on this. But you'll hear us often say that you want to make sure that your goals that you're writing are SMART, and SMART stands for an acronym. And so the S stands for specific, M stands for measurable, the A stands for achievable, the R is relevant, and T is timely. So why are they important? Well, first, they keep you disciplined. It gives you and your teammates, everyone on the team, a sense of responsibility. You get things done when they should be done. It also gives you focus and the individuals on your team focus. To achieve your goals, you have to place focus on them. So once you do, you start avoiding distractions and you stop wasting time. And you set goals to keep you on track so that you can concentrate on them. Also, it's for motivation. It gives you good motivation. It helps you desire and want to achieve something. At a time when you're feeling lost or unwilling, staring at a chart where some conditions are included if certain goals are not achieved, kind of gets you a little motivated. Also, it's setting priorities. It's necessary when achieving your goals, and it helps you place important things above the trivial stuff in life, and helps also with procrastination and progress and growth. You get to move forward and prevent stagnancy when you have goals. It helps to create the perfect vision of yourself and makes you a better person. So this is the S in SMART goals for specific. So this means very simply, just as it sounds, being very direct and straight to the point when you're setting the goal. Make goals come with making specific decisions. They should be very clear and easy to understand. These are some considerations that you can make before making these goals. What do you plan to achieve? What steps do you take before achieving these goals? When do you achieve them? When do you need to set the goals? And when do you need to achieve the goals? The M stands for measurable. And so after you've been very specific about your goal, you need to measure that goal. So measuring shows how much you've done and how much you need to reach a finishing point and how much progress and relapse you're making. So your goal must have a very specific amount or a number or a quantity. I'll share with you all a in an MSY review that I recently had. Someone had put in the goals, written in the goals, and I'll tell you it was none of you. This team will give the child the services she needs. That was the goal. So that's why I say we have a lot of work to do. Nothing measurable, nothing talk about the child's needs at all. So anyways, I thought I would share that. Also, the A is achievable. You want to make sure that goals are real and they're accomplishable. It helps to know limits and not outdo themselves by setting goals beyond their reach. It's that famous, I'm going on vacation this summer and I need to lose 60 pounds. Is that really achievable? Make it very attainable that maybe I lose 2 pounds within a week. You need to know the odds of it being achievable, the possibility of it, and the resources that it's going to take to achieve it, and the process and the final gain of the goals that the team's about to set. For example, the youth cannot venture into running when they hate to run. So you can't write into a goal, this youth is going to run a mile every day, and they hate running. You want it to be achievable. One thing to put in mind before setting goals is make sure the goals are very realistic and it's achievable and it's not a fantasy. Johnny will behave in school every day. Well, that's not really, you got to make it more achievable to maybe really break that down into achievable things that Johnny can focus on in school each day. Maybe he attends every day, and maybe he has lowers the incidence of talking out in class, things like that. The R stands for relevant, and this means being significant. You want to make sure they're necessary and that they matter. The goals corroborate with their life plans. What do they want? They must add to their long-term achievements and not a temporary, no-gain thing. I've shared this story before, but I remember sitting in an EI team meeting, and we really weren't getting far with a mother with a child with special needs, and it didn't seem like they were bonding. And the EI team in the past had like thrown services at her. We'll get you this, we'll provide this, we'll do this, and things just weren't really connecting. And one day that team asked her, like, what matters the most to you? And she said, I just want to know that my child loves me. Like, she can't speak, and sometimes she doesn't smile, and I just want her to know that she loves me. I don't even know if she loves me. And so we really stopped what the EI team stopped what they were doing and focused in on that, and that matters to mom. And so started really looking at her other body language that she's showing mom when she's kicking her feet and things like that is where mom could hone in on, like, oh, she is excited, she does love me, we are bonded. So you really want to make sure that it matters to the individual. And then T for timely. Goals should have deadlines, and you should have a time frame that pushes and motivates them to work towards achieving their set goals. Having a time target hurries up their efforts and helps them prioritize their goals. So some things you want to ask are, when will they get started? When do they need to complete this? How much time will it take? What progress can be made in a month? Those are all examples of making sure it's timely. You also don't want to, you want to keep the timely to kind of intact. You don't want to say next year, um, you know, they'll be doing a lot better in this. That's way, you want to keep it short term so that you can measure. So in general, these are just some do's and don'ts when you're writing goals. You want to be specific. You want to include all team members in the ideas of the goals. You want to set goals that are very doable. You want to set relevant goals that match their interests. And you want to set a time frame and be flexible and prepared to adjust when necessary. You don't want to allow vague goals to be set in the team. You don't want goals in silos. You want to set goals that are unachievable. You don't want to set goals that are unachievable, which then leads to frustration. You don't want to chase irrelevant goals that aren't a priority and lead to distraction of the team. You don't want to expect perfection, and you don't lose sight of the big picture for the family. This is an example worksheet that I just included for you all that you could use with your teams that just breaks the SMART goal out so that when you're brainstorming and writing goals, you can use this as a tool if you so desire to. But it's just one of many tools that you could use to kind of break down that goal. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on? How many of you already are using SMART goals? Yes, Jacob, I will make sure to share that in the chat, and they will be posted on our website today too. Does anyone want to share? Okay, Christy uses the SMART goals. Got a quiet group.
Can I?
Sure.
When you are, kind of saying what you just said, I actually thought that would be a natural and a given. I try when we are speaking about goals, I try to make them in regular intervals so that it's not a big guessing game, like usually 3 months or 6 months or, end of the school year, something like that, to help us all without necessarily having it in front of our eyes to know that that's usually, when we try to achieve certain goals. And I always like to as well talk about short-term and long-term goals. Something that is, easy to achieve, like, let's say, finding a job would be like a 1 to 2 months goal, at least right now in the market. And, and given that age range, of course. And then like improving in school, that is usually something that, I think needs a little bit longer time to see how the report cards turn out and, participating in the school meetings. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Erin, you said you don't put the time frame in the goal because in OASIS you have to put the start and end date of the goal below the goal. So, remember too, like we talk about OASIS, we don't want to sidetrack about OASIS, but when you're entering that plan and you click complete, that does not mean that the plan has been finished or completed. It means it has been written and signed. So if your goal is in 1 month, Johnny and Dad will cook supper every Tuesday night together. you could put that measurable time in there. That's helpful. And then if you need, if you once your team meets, you can always revise that plan and write it and update it. But when you're in Oasis and you click complete, it doesn't mean that your goals are all completed. It means that they've been written and signed. That's helpful. Okay, well, I think I'll turn it over to Nancy and Pat then on this discussion.
Well, before you do that, Jenny, I have two questions. The first was the example of the SMART goal that on the MSY thing. Have you got an example of one that kind of knocked your socks off, that you said this is a good goal when you reviewed that paperwork?
Oh yeah, we've gotten some really obvious ones that have been where they have really broke it down. Yeah, that was that was recently in my mind of that one that it was like, oh my goodness, we have a lot of work to do.
And so how would you have made that a better goal? Just for the purposes of that form, because I think that one's an interesting one, because you don't go out and interview these teams with the MSY paperwork, do you?
Well, sometimes we will reach out to them for feedback.
Okay.
And we have a lot of other things that like, yeah, big things to cover with them. I just happened to see that in their case plan and it really jumped out at me. It wasn't an FCFC, but it doesn't matter who it was. It just jumped out at me as not really being a goal. And so
I'm curious about what you would have put in instead, if I'm not putting you on the spot too much.
well, I'm trying to think of the
Yeah.
youth. I'd have to, I think in general, I would go back to what the youth wants, what the family wants to get out of this. And I would start from there. I don't even think that they really even were heard. And so that's the big starting point. And then I would break it down.
Which got me to my second kind of point. And I was thinking about the example you used from, I think EI stands for early intervention, does it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. It took me a minute to catch up with that. Everybody's acronyms are different. And what I was thinking about, and I think it is the confounding work of having one foot in systems and one foot in family space. If we kind of say there's system space and there's family space, a mom who says, I just want to know my daughter loves me. Mm. And how did you then create a SMART goal from that?
So I remember that I can't take any credit for this. This was their team, but the team then broke that way down into learning different body languages, first of all, of the child that the mom could recognize. And then I believe this has been a while, but I think they also incorporated activities where feeding time was included bonding. So rocking with the bottle always included rocking and things like there were things like that encouraged the bonding. But I remember that the mom was suddenly she bought into the plan. She was all in versus the former plan of the plan was more about services and she just was like okay, well, whatever. And then when they listened to what she wants out of it, she was 100% in. And at the next meeting she was sharing, she's done this, this is what we do together now. So it's a little different. She with a child, she had a medically fragile child. And so I think it was like learning that, no parents get a manual. when they have a child. And so I don't think she just really had anyone to hear her about why she didn't feel like she was bonding. So,
Well, and it does strike me in a number of places and a number of EHRs I end up working with, what you've just described would align more with what people tend to put in as objectives, because that's where it starts to get more specific. And so and then it also strikes me that it would be a better acronym if it was RSMAT, because we would start with the relevant. And I think one of the takeaways from your anecdote is you got to start with where the family's at, which is always the issue with this. When you've got one foot in the system that wants to see measurable spaces, I would guess that your team continued to make meaning for all the activities you were doing by going back to the fact that when you learn how to rock or when you learn how to do this kind of soothing technique, that's a way that allows your child to communicate that they love you. And so the thing about systems is we're really good within the system at measuring how hard we're working. What families are looking for is to figure out whether what we're doing is really working in terms of what matters to them. So it just strikes me that there's a gem in that anecdote. I'm sorry, Nancy, I wanted to get that out before, because it was heavy on my mind.
No, I really am glad. What I love from that example is that very often people talk about goals. This is one of the first times that I've heard the need come out, the need of the parent to know that my child loves me. And so people have, a lot of times misunderstandings between the goal and the need. And that when this mother was able to, once asked, articulate her need to know that my child loves me, then you can begin to identify steps, action steps, goals, objectives to help meet that unmet need. And clearly that unmet need was impacting lots of aspects. So, yeah. Go ahead, Pat. Pat was joking the other day that I always start these by saying, well, I'm going to defer to Pat here because her way of thinking encapsulates so much of the not only the systems that she's worked with across the nation, but also making sure that we always incorporate and align the family's perspective with that. So I'm going to do what I always do, Pat, and I'm going to hand it over to you right now.
Well, thanks a lot for that. You're not my friend, Nancy. Okay, so that's kind of when Nancy and I talked about this a little bit. We were interested in listening to you guys about how do you bridge that? Because again, we've got a system that wants to measure, as a number of young care coordinators I know would say, they measure output. They don't measure whether it's working, Pat. And I'll be like, well, that's kind of what we do. And also the work you do that's life affirming and creates a context for a mother to be able to say, I just want my kid to love me. I want to know that she loves me. So I'm curious about how do you bridge that? And then the other thing from where you sit, you can write really good SMART goals, but getting really good SMART goals that align with what's most important to the family, that can be used to herd the cats that are called a service coordination team, so that they're not your goals, that they're everybody's goals and everybody feels like they land. I'm curious about how you all do that moving forward.
I feel like the families are bombarded because they don't have just goals from us. They have goals from schools and CPS and all these others, and they have to think in small stepwise progression. And so to me, that's the most important thing, is to get the family's voice involved, articulate that goal, and get those small inputs from the family, because you don't know what they want until you ask them, and they don't always know what they want. And so then you can define the goal across the systems, and that's the leading communication in your service coordination meetings. And then it's defined for the family. You have clear family expectations, and then they all have cell phones. So have them pull out some of the dates and put them on their calendar. That's how I do it.
So, Mary, it sounds like one of the things you do is a serious system interpretation kind of function, which is because, I mean, I can't tell you the number of families I've met who have goals from this system, goals from this system, goals from this system. When I look at them, I'm like, they're not really compatible if I read them in a certain way. I've got the school district working on insight because they see the child as willfully problematic. I see the medical community is working on adjusting to your ASD disorder and creating self-acceptance about who you are and that it's not insight. And I think, who can live with that? I mean, somebody's going to blow up, and it's probably the kid. So I'm curious about how you move to be able to influence that, because when I got a hospital here and I've got a school here and I'm in the middle, I don't like it very well, because I know somebody's going to get trampled. What is that saying? When the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. So I'm curious about how you do that.
Well, what I do is when I sign the parent and family up, I always spend an hour with the parents or caregivers prior to the service coordination meeting, because I want them to know I'm on their side. I want to know and I'm a nurse, so naturally I do deep assessments, but I want to know I'm on their side. I'm here to represent them, advocate for them, have clarity so that they are open to speak. And so that my communication is based on what I receive from them. That's how I do it. And I mean, we really do have an excellent service coordination team in this county. And everybody, and there's been studies, where you have differing opinions across two different groups. How do you get them to align with the same goal? And it's actually a Robert Wood Johnson study, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation study. And that's kind of where I align, that we're not here to determine individual steps for us. We're here to determine the end goal for the family. And I kind of use that research for that.
And then system folks that may have the goals because the plan kind of fits in their form. Sometimes I think it's the plan fit more than we really thought through how to implement it. The act of coming together in a service coordination meeting positions people to start to modify their stance relative to that goal.
Yeah, I mean, because if you have 8 people in a service coordination meeting, those individual 8 people can't go and assess this family. They have it kind of like the elephant. If you see the tail, if you see the foot, if you see the trunk, you all see something different. I try to present the whole elephant.
Okay. Based on the meeting you've had, and you've gathered the plans and the paperwork by then,
yeah,
in terms of bringing them together.
Yeah, and I have the OASIS entered with as much data as I have beforehand.
And what percentage of the time, well, I'm curious, what percentage are people in there coming in prepared and supported to change? What percentage are they maybe open to change but really weren't looking for it? And what percentage are they hunkered down in their position when you have those meetings?
As far as what I have with the family beforehand?
No, I'm talking about when you bring everybody together.
Service coordination.
Yeah.
They're amenable to what works for the family. I mean, and sometimes they've had past experiences as a family that may not be as positive as it could be. And that's where giving that background, they understand more about. I've not had any big conflicts within the service coordination meetings because they have information.
So 100% of the time you have a team that's amenable to change, that they can say, we can go with that. And part of what you do is a reframing process where you reshare the story of the family.
Right.
Basically, so that people can make a shift. I'm curious about how they get to you. Is it, and this is always interesting to me, is it, okay, we've tried a bunch of things and we know it's not working, or is it service coordination is available, let's do it? I'm curious about that.
How the family gets to me or how the service coordination
How
team?
the whole thing gets to you, because it strikes me that what you're describing is families aren't coming to you in a vacuum. While you are a door they can walk through, there's a lot that's gone on before you got there, right?
Right.
If they've got all these plans and goals. So I'm curious about how that happens.
I mean, I've been here since February, so I think sometimes it's a new set of fresh eyes where people have been frustrated within the system trying to help a family that they perceive doesn't want help. And when you really get down with a family, there's very few families who don't want help. They just
Right.
don't know how to navigate it by themselves. And some of the families have been pushed in the corner. You know, sometimes we'll get somebody from other counties as well. I mean, you have a family that's pushed in the corner and like you said, herding cats. They're like a cat's going to come out and get somebody because they're so frustrated that they don't know how to navigate the system. They don't know how to get people on their side. They don't know how to advocate for themselves. And I'm that advocator for them in the service coordination. And I'm also very upfront and truthful with them. So if there's a difference between what they say, what their perception is versus my perception or the service coordination team, I discuss that gap.
So pull the curtain back and say we have different, acknowledge those differences.
Right.
One of the things that's interesting to me about this is a lot of the SMART goal or the goal or need work is embedded in the plan. And the plan can be a piece of paper or the plan can be a lifestyle. And the thing, I think the balance that service coordinators have to fit is they have to fit the plan, the need for output, with the development of the community, the ability of somebody like Mary to show up and say, here, you guys are over here treating the tail and I've got a whole elephant over here, but it's really not an elephant, it's a llama that you guys have been treating. So maybe we should redirect and then create space for the gathered community to get smarter all the time. Because ultimately you're done at some point. And what we want is we don't want families to leave services. We want families to use services when they need to use services in such a way that it'll make their life work better. The problem with many families is when they get into services, they just infect the whole life. And so this balance between community management and plan development is always interesting to me. And how to hold the vision, and Jenny's example, how to hold the vision of, we're not just teaching you a technique, we're creating a glide path so that you absolutely know and can feel that your daughter loves you. And doesn't she deserve to be able to communicate that to her mother? And that's where I think we create meaning with families. So I think that's interesting to think about. Nancy, what are you thinking? Watch me football it back to you.
You know, one of the things that sometimes concerns me is the idea of writing goals for families, and I know in service coordination it becomes really important to be able to, again, what Jenny talked about, the relevance. So I'm curious about how you as service coordinators look at the difference between writing goals for family members and how you advocate for the team to accept the goals that the families have articulated, and how you juggle those differing perspectives.
I think all in all, that does not happen too often, because in theory, we all are there because we have the wish to help the family. So that being the first priority, and our guidelines clearly say we have to put the family and what they want first. That alone gives already the direction. And even if we sometimes don't fully understand the family, you know, I think that is the guideline. Usually we work with the schools and with DD and with some of the other agencies here, but I think we all try to show a lot of goodwill. And we've had situations where we were at our wits' ends and, you know, had discussions. And so, but that is very rare. What I found interesting is that Mary said earlier, she has been, you know, a care coordinator since February. So, and a fresh set of eyes. I think that is really important too, that you are trying to kind of see that every family is individual, you know, and of course it is great to get a new colleague with a new approach, with, hey, why are you doing it this way? You know, so I think that's always very helpful if you get a little bit more input from the outside due to newcomers, or, you know, people that even come from a different field of work. I think that's very helpful and valuable. But I think all in all, we just need to be empathetic without being in the way. You know, just we will never know how it is for them, and, you know, but try a little bit to walk in the family's shoes and encounter the barriers and so on, you know. And also what I noticed is a lot of families, or, you know, moms, dads, whoever is involved, guardians, really dislike when you say things like, I completely understand, you know, so, because you don't, you know, you do not. So I try to word it differently, like, oh, this must be like, you know, that must be so hard, or, you know, trying to show my empathy, but, you know, making on the other hand clear, you know, this is what you are, you know, going through, and I will help you to the best of my ability, but I am not you. You guide us here, you know, you tell us what you need and how we can be of help. So that all being said, we of course have families that we find very hard to work with, you know, and where there is really hard to establish harmony and peace. So yeah, I mean, we know that too. It's not always, you know, a walk in the sunshine, so to say.
I was going to share, Pat, that when I would sit with families, and after I got the relevance down of what actually do you want out of this to improve, I know that we already discussed a toolkit on assessing strengths and needs. I would really focus on those strengths that the family and the youth had when writing goals. And so I would hone in on what are they really good at before we even dug deeper into the goal writing. And then I would incorporate those strengths, because I think, you know, sometimes you'll see a goal of the youth will do better in school. Well, right. If he could have done better, he would do better. So he, you know, doesn't maybe have the tools. So focusing more on the strengths of the child and the family, and what do you really need? What do you mean by doing good in school? What does that mean? You know, is it behavioral, and, you know, things like that. So just honing in more on the strengths.
So, and where's the link with needs then for you, Jenny?
So the need, like, I would tie that into what is the overarching need. So, I used this, I think a little bit ago, but I would, when I was meeting with families, for some reason, maybe it's because I love food, but if I found out that a family was good at cooking, I would always try and incorporate that of the family environment of doing that together and sitting together, making the meal together. I think there's a lot to be said about breaking bread together. And so especially if they said something like, "Oh, mom is a really good cook," then, well, why she could teach you, and we could incorporate those things in of that time together. It wasn't just cooking, but I don't know if that's a bad example, but that's what I would really pull the strengths first. I shared this example about a young boy who's, acting out. My hairdresser's son is acting out pretty significantly in school, but he loves to be a helper. And he loved to open the door and greet the kids in the morning. So using that for him more as how can we increase his helping skills at school. I would tend to work backwards and start there with strengths.
So this is interesting because I think you've got three concepts kind of floating around. One is the goal, one is the need, and one is the strength. And each of us go to where we're either compelled or feel more comfortable. Jenny, when you were talking about food, here's the thought that went through my head. When is a sandwich not a sandwich? Now that's going to be haunting me all day. I'm going to be thinking about with everybody I talk to, when is a sandwich not a sandwich? Because I think when you talk about food, I think a sandwich is not a sandwich. I think a sandwich is a meaning for you. And I think you use that meaning as an engagement technique with the families you get to work with. And, so what I think about is what's the meaning of food and how do we use that to hit the relevant part? I think you can, and so for me, I'm more interested to go to where do we go with need? So, for the kid who's acting out who likes to be a helper, what is the meaning of that? And then I think the question is, how do you write SMART goals that always go back to the thing that matters? What is it about a kid who acts out so magnificently, but still wants to help out? Still, if you ask him to carry the groceries, is the first kid to get in line to carry the groceries. You've got to be able to ponder the question about why does he need to act out? What's that driven by? Is the driving force attention? Is the driving force individuation? Is the driving force I'm introducing chaos because it reflects what's going on with me? And paying attention to that meaning. And if I were his mother, I'd have a clear goal. I want him to stop acting out, right? So the takeaway for me in thinking about this is need relates to your acronym in terms of relevance. If you can understand that need, that hole in the heart that's driving people, and not everybody can articulate their need. Not everybody is the mother that says, I just want my daughter to love me. Others may be, but I wish I could be so articulate and unapologetic about my unmet needs, but we all carry around baggage when it comes to that. And then if you said, if I address this need, I would be able to see this result. And if I saw this result, these are the steps, which would be in the outline of the SMART goal, and the strategy or the fuel we use to float that is that focus on strengths. So mom's a pretty good cook, but the real issue or the real unmet need in the son's the hole in his heart may be as simple as, is there enough for me to be fed? Is there enough to go around for me? You all know kids, some of whom it just seems like there's never enough. They're just never feeling filled up. And so it's interesting for me to think about the intersection of need, and goal and strength and how those things come into play. What do you think, Nancy?
I got to formulate my thoughts a little bit more. So I'm
Okay.
curious about again, what any of the other, thank you, Jenny. I appreciate your talking about how those fit, because I really do. As I said, I got to formulate my thoughts there. They just start coming out. But you know, Pat's introduced a concept to me about how for discussion, how you always have to go back to the context that brought a person to service coordination. You know, what's brought them here? Why are we meeting with them? Is it because the county is saying we're going to take this child away? Is it because the court is saying, you know, this child is going to go to detention, or we're going to take custody away? You know, what's the context that's bringing them? And then, like Jenny talked about, you know, what are the strengths that the family has to bear? And then what Pat's just talked about, the relevance, you know, what are those unmet needs? Because we can't even begin to start talking about goals or action steps or objectives or whatever it is in the OASIS planning form. But you can't do that until you understand both the reason that they came in and the needs, in order to then look at Jenny's strengths to address those through the action steps. Just started triggering all those, the tapestry that creates.
And how do you juggle that? And bring together a group of people that are also juggling all their balls in the air. I mean, that's really, and get it down. If you're lucky, you have that moment where somebody says, well, this is what I really want, or can't you see, I don't want it this way, I want it that way. And people are startled, versus, you know, just really understanding and synthesizing those stories so that you can help people move to a different place and straddle a system orientation, which measures what you're going to do, and a family orientation, which hopefully measures why does it matter to the person.
So that takes me back to what, Mary, when you were talking earlier, the whole idea of synthesizing in order to be able to help the team see the relevance. But you have to make sure that if the family can't articulate it like the mother did with Jenny's team, that you can in that meeting prior have identified some potential needs and then clarified with the family, you know, are these right? Because if they are, then we can go to the team and talk about brainstorming different ways to address that in order to write the SMART goals based on what the family eventually says, yeah, that's it. That will work for me. All these others, all right, but this one only will work for me. And then write your goal around that.
And I'd like to say something kind of going back to what Jeannie said about using the strengths. There's a book, it's called Switch. I don't know if anybody's read it. It's by Dan and Keith Heath. And they talk about bright spots. And it's basically, okay, they already know what their problems are. And you know, they may be hiding their problems or not dealing with it. And you can get into that, but you need to focus on what's the bright spot that is really valuable to that family for you to understand. And so then when you talk to the service coordination team, you go over the problems, but you also want to say, hey, they're really hitting it out of the park with this specific bright spot. And then that encourages them too, because if you've worked with the family or worked with families and you're not seeing any progress as in the service coordination meetings or in the service social systems, you want to see that progress too, because you kind of get a little like, are we really making a difference? But that book is called Switch. It's a really easy read, and it's like environmental and community change. And if I would say what's the best book to read, I would read that book, because if you focus on a bright spot, you can change your life.
Other people have thoughts about that? Thank you, Mary. I appreciate your pointing that out. I was not familiar with that book, so thank you. Others have experiences with that whole process of being able to move from, especially the people who are using SMART goals. You know, how have you attended to strengths and really focused on what was relevant for families in that process, as opposed to what's relevant for the system folks in attendance?
One thing that I often see, people who kind of are on the edge of systems, which I tend to see you guys as the bridge builders across community and family space and system space, because they weren't all kind of birthed in the same place. I often will see service coordinators kind of cordon off different parts. So they end up having the work with families, and then they go back to do the translation within systems. You know, I'm thinking about you, Mary, in terms of you're a nurse, so I'm assuming you've worked in pretty complex medical settings. And you know, hospitals always make me laugh because they make you know, like children's mental health and all that look like amateurs when it comes to bureaucracy. You know, there's a very clear hierarchy, and you kind of not need to know how that goes. But I'm curious about how you guys bridge that, or do you end up finding yourself compartmentalizing a little bit? And this is the time when I have my structures put in place, and this is the time when I'm doing the work with families. And you know, ultimately, it's important to remember that all of this system of care wraparound, all of this was a strategy about improving systems. We've hired a group of non-traditional empathy agents, is what I call you guys, people who are on the frontier of systems. But ultimately, the big, some would have called it a vision, I would call it a hallucination, was we could create systems that were automatically bridging that. So we didn't need to have sentries at the edge of all these frontiers of spaces that families navigate. And so I'm curious about that. And since we're getting close to the end of our time, I just want to leave you this year with pondering that and thinking about how much time you end up only in system space and how much time you end up kind of crossing over to family space, and where are the options to kind of make that an easier thing. Because that's, again, sort of my hallucination, is that we can really create systems where all of it can be fit in and not feel like you have to have multiple roles in terms of navigating this. I'm thinking about architecture at this point, and I don't even have a home remodeling project going on, but I'm thinking about system architecture.
And if I could, my words of suggestion to you all is, don't get so bogged down on the process of it as much as you don't want it to be vague. You want it to be extremely clear when you're writing these goals. And so you want everybody in the room, obviously, to know exactly how this goal will be achieved. And when it will be achieved. So when you're writing them, just remember, how clear is it versus how vague is it? If someone picked it up, this piece of paper up that you wrote, will they know exactly the goal that you're after, your team is after, and how it will be achieved and when it will be achieved, versus the vagueness of it?
And my takeaway would be, make sure that you always focus on relevance and create space for youth and parents to say, this specific action is a step that will get me close to what matters to me in terms of meaning. And if you get that, then you've got a template to do the work for tomorrow, but also a planning horizon that's much further down the road than what are we going to do tomorrow?
And I don't have anything so thought-provoking as that. My role is to ask you to please check the chat box where there's an evaluation that you're going to be asked to complete. So in the chat box under CH, the Sharon put the evaluation link in there. And so if you would please do that, we would be most appreciative.
Thank you, everyone.